Hello there, people of the internet. I'm over here doing some top 5 lists of some of the things that I have here. And whenever I was looking around at what it is that I have, I was debating to myself, you know what, let's go ahead and do a top 6 because I could not narrow it down to a top 5. We're going to do a top 6 favorite black powder guns that I own. Alright, two honorable mentions here. These right here are not included inside the list, and I'll explain why. Right, here's my Oviedo Mauser, chambered in 7.62 NATO. And whenever I load 7.62 NATO for this, I typically use black powder, just because I make my own powder, and it makes it dramatically less expensive to load and shoot this rifle. Or to load for and shoot this rifle. But for whatever reason, whatever rifling the Spanish used in these guns handles black powder fouling extremely well, and I don't suffer much of a loss of accuracy whenever I run black powder through this particular rifle, no matter how many rounds I send through it. My loadout whenever I take this to the range is typically 100 rounds. Like, I think I'm down to like 97 just because like brass I've had to discard and whatnot, but I have a 100-round batch, or I had, and I reload it, and that's what I take to the range. And since I can load that for like 10 cents a shot, it's a good way to go to the range basically all day and shoot all day for not a lot of money. But this right here, I don't have to worry about a loss of accuracy. I don't know why. It's just the rifling that the Spanish use, and it works extremely well. So that is, I guess, a black powder rifle that I use, although it's actually a smokeless powder rifle, but I use it for black powder. This is another one. I like this one a lot. This is a Nepal Martini Henry. I'm not positive on what this is chambered in. I'm pretty sure it's the 450 577 Martini Henry cartridge, which is what most of these are chambered in. But it might be a 4570 Martini Henry, just because there are some Martini Henrys that ended up being chambered for 4570. I'm not positive, haven't figured it out. But the reason why this one's not on the list is because I haven't actually shot it. I have not taken it out to run rounds through it, but seems like a good rifle. These right here, they do have a barrel that is just welded in versus like screwed in or anything like that. So they do have some issues whenever it comes to that, so I'm not going to load particularly spicy rounds inside of this thing, but it still would be cool to take this out and shoot it. But just because of my lack of experience with it, this one did not make the list. Alright, let's go ahead and get started. I have an 1851 Pieta. These are so commonplace whenever it comes to black powder shooting, just because the Pieta and the Ubertis, they are overwhelmingly numerous out there on the black powder market. They're also extremely inexpensive for the quality of revolver that you are getting. These could have some issues. I have heard of people having some issues with both Pieta and Uberti, but they're pretty gosh darn easy fixes if you know what to do and know what to look for. Sometimes there's some spring issues with them. You can go out and get yourself aftermarket springs that are much more durable, and they're going to give your revolver a much longer lifespan. I've heard people tell me that they have issues with frames stretching. I'm running some tests on that. I have absolutely hot rodded the living hell out of one of my 1851 Pietas, and there is, as of right now, no brass stretching on that revolver. Testing is still going though. Bottom line, fantastic little guns for the amount of money that you spend. 6-shot, in this particular case, 44 caliber. I typically load mine whenever I'm at the range with 25 grains of black powder, because you really don't need much more than that. If you're using it for defensive purposes, I would do more like 30, maybe even 35 grains, assuming that you have a revolver that can stand up to that. Typically, whenever you hot rod Pietas and whatnot, like really hot rod them, that's whenever you start having issues with like springs breaking and whatnot, just because they're not overly capable at handling those levels of recoil. Depends on the bullets that you use, how heavy they are, how much gunpowder you use, the types of gunpowder you use, and so on. But if you don't completely hot rod these things, then they tend to last a pretty good lifespan. This right here is one of my favorites, this particular one, just because it does have a shorter barrel. I've taken this out, I've shot it a whole lot. I make my own gunpowder, and I use coconut fiber as my charcoal source. And man, that has like almost no fouling with it. Of course it's got fouling because it's black powder, but whenever I run that through my homemade stuff through my revolvers, I can get 8, maybe even 10 cylinders out of that thing before I even start to notice any difficulty from like things gumming up and whatnot. But wonderful little revolvers. I really, really like this particular one. I've got a couple of these, but I like this particular one because of that shorter barrel. It's easier to carry around. It really is. It's also an extraordinarily smooth revolver. I went ahead and I took out the old nipples and I put on Wolf brand nipples that are I think these are still number 10s. I got both number 10 and number 11 caps, but I also make my own percussion caps. So basically whatever I have will work for those. I like this one. Alright, so that is our number 6. Number 5. This is an 1847 Colt Walker. This particular one started off life as a black powder revolver. I believe that this is a Uberti made black powder revolver. It had what I believe is a Richard Mason conversion done to it. So what the Richard Mason conversion is, well, at least in the modern day, the cylinder is swapped out for a cylinder that can handle smokeless powder, because most of your black powder cylinders cannot handle that. And then whenever that is swapped out, it is a shorter cylinder in comparison to the cylinder that was originally on the revolver. And this additional loading gate system is added in, where we have a loading gate and we also have a firing pin to hit a primer versus a percussion cap on your revolver. Then we also have our little ejection gate right here, which you can use to push your old cartridges out. This is technically now a smokeless powder revolver, but it started life as a black powder revolver, and I'm sure that I'm going to send plenty of black powder 45 Colt through this thing as time goes on, just because I enjoy what I do. But this is a large gun. 45 Colt has a good amount of power behind it. As a matter of fact, if you load it with black powder, it's actually more powerful than like the cowboy loads. You can get some pretty gosh darn spicy and potent safe shooting 45 Colt that can run through these things, especially with this massive revolver. There's a lot of meat on this thing. Like, people don't, it does not appear on camera how large of a gun this actually is. For retrospect, a full-size 1911, do I have one around here to show? I do not. A full-size 1911 is about the length of this barrel alone. This is a huge gun. Like, really, really huge. I love it, though. I always wanted a 45 Colt revolver, and now I got a real nice one. Alright, so that was number 5. Number 4, this is probably my favorite muzzleloader. This is a Spanish Jakar. I'm not sure if I pronounced that correctly. You'll have to forgive me on that. It's a percussion cap. This particular one is a 45 caliber. Like, it's got a 4.55 diameter bore. And what that means is that I can use the same 4.57 bullets for this that I do with my 45 caliber revolvers. And that is really, really, really nice, because then I only have to buy one size of round ball to shove through these things. I typically run this 45 cal with 50 grains of gunpowder if I am out just plinking at the range. If I were to bump that up to, say, 75 grains, that's where I'd start to see like a good load for it. I'm sure somebody's going to yell at me for my front sight. People always yell at me for the front sight. They're like, "You're an idiot. You don't know what you're doing. Your front sight is on backwards." And they just never think that maybe I have that done for a reason. I can't see. My eyesight is not good. Here in Florida, we have sun, and that is shiny. Whenever the sun shines on that, because I have it on backwards, and we have this big old surface right here, we get lots of glint that comes off of it, allowing me to see it extremely easy. I almost treat it like a fiber optic, versus having just this flat face right here, which is what would normally go on. So that just allows me to see my front sight better, and people call me an idiot because they just don't understand that there's a method to my madness. 45 cal, real long barrel, surprisingly lightweight. I think it's just because of the wood that is used on this thing. I have no idea what kind of wood is actually used on this thing, but surprisingly lightweight. It has served me well. I've shot this thing a tremendous amount. It is rather accurate whenever I use the appropriate size ball. Yeah, I mean, not much more that I can say about it. All right, so this right here is one of my favorites, and definitely needs to be reshined because she is getting a little dull. But hey, this is honestly one of my main go-tos, because if I'm going out in the field to shoot muzzleloaders and I'm bringing my black powder revolver, I'm probably bringing that just so I only need one kind of round ball. All right, up next, I have my 4570 Trapdoor Springfield. This right here is probably one of my all-time favorite black powder firearms, just because the 4570 is a mean little cartridge, and boy is it fun to shoot, and I can reload it for not a whole lot of money since I make my own gunpowder. This is a 425 grain bullet, and it's in front of 70 grains of gunpowder. Not a whole lot of recoil behind these, all things considered, because that's a big piece of lead, and it's going to move at about 16, maybe 1700 feet per second out of a full-length rifle like this right here. I really like these. I like the history behind them. I like the design of them. You have all the benefits of a breech-loading firearm, but it looks like an old-school musket. And you got a lot of power coming out of the end of that gun. So that is probably the next one on my pick of my favorites. As a matter of fact, this is one that I take out on a pretty gosh darn regular basis, just because I love shooting 4570. There's nothing better than hitting steel with a really, really large piece of lead out at long distance. Yeah. If I had to pick a favorite out of all of my black powder rifles, it would probably be that one right there. All right. Now we have ourselves a 50 caliber muzzleloader. I think that this right here is Traditions. It has a name somewhere. It says Spain, Frontier, Connecticut Valley Arms. All right, so it's a CVA. This is my typical go-to whenever it comes to just bringing out a muzzleloader. If I'm bringing out my revolver as well, I'll bring my 45 caliber. But the reality is, whenever I go out to shoot muzzleloaders, I typically don't bring my revolver, just because these are a lot simpler to clean than the revolver. This right here is one of my favorites. It is a 50 caliber, but it's short and handy and lightweight and easy to maneuver with and move around. Not only that, but since this is a Hawkins style of rifle, we got ourselves a locking wedge right there. Pull the locking wedge out, the barrel comes off, makes this extremely easy to clean. This right here is probably one of my favorite muzzleloaders that I have, just because of the simplicity of cleaning it. All I do, pull the barrel off, run hot water directly from the sink down it, pull the nipple off, lather the whole thing in oil if it's going to be sitting for any real length of time, versus something like this right here. This is more like a plains style of rifle. You got to like have a punch and pull these pins out here and take the nose cap off, and there's a lot more that you have to do to get this rifle apart, to clean it. Typically whenever I clean this rifle, I don't even bother taking it apart. It's just a more time-consuming process, because I don't want to get a bunch of water under the wood, because that's a good way to get your rifle to start rusting. So that's just a more time-consuming process versus something like this right here. Wedge out, barrel off, hot water in, and you're off to the races. 50 caliber, that's a good potent piece of lead going down range at some pretty good velocities. I'll typically load this, actually whenever I'm out there like just plinking, I'll typically load this one with 30 to 50 grains of powder, depending on the types of powder that I'm using. But I do have some instances where I've taken this hunting and I've brought out some actual hunting projectiles versus the round ball that I use. And if I use my homemade gunpowder with 100 grains of gunpowder behind it, and my gunpowder is corn, so it's a little less powerful than the commercial stuff, it's going to be more like the equivalency of, say, 80 grains of powder. But with 100 grains of powder by volume behind one of those actual hunting bullets, like copper, hollow point hunting round. I can't remember what they actually are. They're one of those Sabo rounds. They actually hit at point of aim with this rifle at 100 yards, and I really wouldn't take any shots at anything beyond that. This rifle has served me successfully, and I say rifle, it is a rifled musket, I suppose. But that right there is probably my go-to muzzleloader whenever I'm just using a muzzleloader. I'll pick that particular one just because it's so right on point. With all my other muzzleloaders, like, no matter how I load it, they just have a cone of fire that is probably about like this at 100 yards, and that's just typical with round ball. For whatever reason, this particular one just handles round ball exceptionally well. Alright, and this right here is my last pick. This is a Connecticut Valley Arms as well, Spanish double-barreled 12-gauge percussion cap shotgun that I got from a very good friend of mine. So my buddy decided to go ahead and gift me this basically because I've always wanted a smooth bore percussion cap black powder shotgun. And the reason why I've always wanted one of these is because since there's no rifling inside of the barrel, you can basically use anything for ammunition coming out of this thing. In the event that things go wrong and you don't have any ammo, I know how to make my own black powder, and I make my own percussion caps. I can keep this thing running basically indefinitely. Even in the event that things get so bad that I cannot make my own percussion caps, I can still make black powder. I have organs, and I can use that to make nitrate. And assuming that we're not in the desert or beyond any place where I could burn something to get charcoal, I can make gunpowder. You don't need sulfur for gunpowder. Not a lot of people know that, but you don't need sulfur for gunpowder. After that, pull these nipples, and you have a direct access to that gunpowder, and you can light it off with a fuse, a burning stick, a lighter, whatever it is that you have. That's one of the things I really, really like about these systems. And with it being a shotgun, I can use anything for ammo, unlike something like a rifle, which needs a particularly sized projectile to send downrange. I could load rocks, screws, coins, BBs, like from a BB gun. I can load whatever I want into this thing and send that downrange if I needed to. Alright, well, ladies and gentlemen, that right there is my list of my favorite black powder firearms that I own. I do own more, but I think that this was a good, solid list. Thanks for watching. Appreciate your time. Like, subscribe, share. Description below has a link to all sorts of stuff. Go check it out. You guys go off, have yourself a fantastic day, and I will see you on the next episode.
Been a little while since I've done this. Bonnie and Clyde be damned. The poor man's Garen. It's a shame that bolt-action shotguns aren't more mainstream.